One windless afternoon, as the last rays of sun were painting the Bodhi forest gold, a young disciple sought out the Buddha in meditation. The disciple knelt beneath the tree, their eyes filled with the heavy contemplation of the world. Then the disciple spoke, their voice carrying the accumulated sorrow of humanity. "Venerable Buddha, I see that people speak too much about peace. They paint an ideal world where everyone loves each other, where there are no more boundaries between races or classes, and no more hatred. They call it nirvana on earth, but Venerable Buddha, after so many centuries, I only see war repeating itself endlessly, changing only its name and form. Sometimes it's the sound of swords, sometimes it's a cold war in the mind. Peace forever remains a distant fairy tale. So, does such a world truly exist? One where serenity is absolute and the dream is no longer just a dream?" The Buddha smiled, a smile without judgment, only boundless understanding. He said, "I know you are eagerly awaiting an affirmation, a promise of a place without suffering. But I wish to show you a truth more stark and more magnificent. My dear child, if a world existed that you just described, a place completely still, with no friction, no opposition whatsoever, it would no longer be the earth you live on. Because it is the incessant collision, the friction of opposites that keeps this life always in motion. Just as a volcano must erupt for the earth to renew itself, or a river needs rapids so the water doesn't stagnate and turn to mud. It is the suffering, the impact itself, that is the material preventing nature from turning into a cold, insensitive stone. This life requires chaos to exist. Absolute peace, if you attain it, would be the cessation of movement. Listen well. I will tell you a long story about the universe's journey, where chaos is not the enemy, but the first heartbeat of all things. My child, listen very carefully. I will begin by telling you about the first beats of the universe, even before humans appeared. I will move slowly through every step life chose to manifest. Close your eyes, disciple, and travel back in time with me to the very beginning, when this planet had not yet known the sound of human feet. At that time, the earth was not the silence you imagine. It was a giant machine of chaos. There were no cool shadows of trees, no peaceful grasslands. There was only the roar of nature. Don't you see? The ocean was boiling like a bottomless pot. The mountains were not places for humans to worship, but gigantic cracks of fury, constantly rising and collapsing. Thunder wasn't an omen. It was the breath of the sky, striking the ground relentlessly. Rivers didn't flow gently but raged like bursting veins. Collision was the only thing that existed. Rock crushed rock, fire burned everything, water rose to submerge the land, then receded to reveal a new shape. Earth did not seek stability, it only sought balance through self-destruction. If you call this chaos war, then that was the first and grandest war. This war had no winners or losers. It was just the process for this matter to self-form. It was the heat, the cold, the rise, and the ebb that created the first elements. You see, even before the concepts of life or death existed, the world's nature was nonstop impact. That is the primal rhythm. Absolute stillness has no place on this spinning planet. Chaos is not a terrible thing. It is the first heartbeat, the catalyst from which miracles are born. Humans always think that peace is the starting point. But for the universe, chaos is the starting point for all life. After millions of eons of collision, something incredibly small and fragile happened. From the hot puddle, from the condensed steam, a first cell learned how to hold its breath. It was a tiny living thing, so weak it was almost non-existent. Imagine a blade of grass trembling before the first gust of wind. It had no fangs, no claws, no intellect to protect itself. Its entire existence was only fragility. But that very fragility was a great lesson. To survive, that sprout of life had to learn to change, to learn to adapt to the impact of the surrounding environment. It had to find a way to survive the lightning storm and the cold of the long night. From that moment, the universe knew what fragility was. Life was born not to seek absolute safety, but to cherish each short breath amidst the vortex of destruction and creation. That original seed of life divided, creating countless different forms. Each form carried within it a primal fear, the fear of vanishing, of being redissolved into the chaos. This fear is not hatred. It is the most powerful driving force of evolution. If the Earth previously collided with fire and water, now life began to collide with life and death. Whether a strand of seaweed or a single-celled organism, they were all trying to cling to this life, pushing back against the formlessness that sought to engulf them. Thus, disciple, as soon as life appeared, it carried within it an internal battle, the fight to maintain its fragile form against the natural law that wished to pull it back into dust. And that is a battle that never ends. When life had developed into myriad forms, you saw a new world open up. It was the world of animals, where existence was expressed most starkly and powerfully. You often look at the animal struggle and call it cruel. But look deeper, disciple. They do not fight out of hatred. The tiger pounces on the prey, not because it hates the prey. It does so because it must sustain life for itself and for the young waiting in the den. It is a brutal but necessary exchange of energy. In their world, there is no concept of a just cause or war for honor. There is only one law: species survival. A herd of animals defends its territory not to accumulate wealth. They do so because that is the only place they can find water and food, the prerequisite for life not to be extinguished. This fight is an absolute commitment to survival, a pure instinct not veiled by ideology or greed. If they stop fighting, they will stop living, and the species will vanish. Weakness will be weeded out, not out of malice, but because nature does not tolerate stagnation. Peace, in the world of animals, does not mean no fighting. Peace is the temporary balance between continuous struggles. When an animal is full and not threatened, it rests, but the instinct of vigilance is always there. This collision keeps everything strong. It keeps the gene pool constantly selected. The fighting itself is the only way to maintain a diverse and continually evolving world. So, disciple, fighting is not a mistake of creation. It is the method life chose to protect itself over millions of years. Then, humans appeared. Humans stepped out of the chaos, not as an entirely new organism, but as the heir to every species that ever existed. In every one of your cells, disciple, the roar of the volcano still echoes, the trembling of the first blade of grass, and the wild call of the hunter. You carry within you the survival memory of millions of years of evolution. When humans began to think, they could not erase these primal instincts. The survival instinct is still the anchor that holds humans to the earth. Deep down, humans still fear the cold, fear hunger, and fear being rejected by the community. For that reason, absolute peace has never been the human instinct. Your instinct is self-protection against all dangers, whether they are real dangers or merely threats in the mind. Humans have intellect, but that intellect is built upon the foundation of the hunter instinct. Humans use intellect to build tall houses, but also use it to build dividing fences. Humans find ways to love, but also find countless ways to hurt each other. The peace humans crave is a new coat of paint applied to the old wall of instinct. They want stability without having to fight, but they forget that even sitting still and meditating is an internal battle to master the chaotic calls from within. So, don't be surprised. When humans face a survival choice, even if it is only spiritual survival or honor, they often return to the wild call, because in every cell, the call of survival is still present. That is the law of life, not malice. There came a time when humans did not just worry about surviving nature, but also began to worry about losing what they already had. This was a major turning point when simple survival instinct transformed into the greed for accumulation. Initially, animals fought for food. Humans were the same. But then, humans did not just contend for the food in front of them. They contended for invisible things: power, honor, belief, and recognition. The fear of loss, fear of losing status, fear of losing control, fear of losing respect, created a new kind of war. From that fear, contention gained a name, became organized, and was veiled with flowery language. People began to call their war a just cause. They said, "We fight for justice. We fight to protect the faith. We fight to bring peace." But deep down, it all returned to one point: the fear of having to let go. Greed was not inherently bad. It was merely an evolved version of the instinct to survive. But when greed crossed the line of mere survival, it became the cause of all division. Humans began to draw boundaries. This is my land. That is my idea. You do not belong to us. From then on, everything became a battle for possession. War was no longer a direct confrontation for food. It became a war of concepts and ideals. Humans shed blood for things they cannot see, simply because they believe holding on to that thing is the only way to retain their own fragile form in the vast world. And when the just cause was born, humans permitted themselves to commit every atrocity, as long as they believed it would lead to a piece of their own design. This is the moment when collision became more complex and harder to resolve than ever before. My disciple, keep listening. I will speak about the irony of things born to alleviate suffering, yet ultimately create greater suffering. Don't you see, disciple, religion was born from the deepest place in the human heart, where they yearn to find meaning and connection. Every faith began with a pure light, with teachings of unconditional love, of compassion, of setting aside the ego to live for others. Those teachings were like a cool stream, initially intended only to soothe the fire of fear and selfishness in every heart. People learned to bow, learned to share, learned to cross their own boundaries. That was when religion brought true peace within individuals. But then, when those teachings were gathered, organized into a large empire of belief, the initial light gradually faded. People began to use faith not to shine inward, but to distinguish insiders from outsiders. Religion became a banner to identify factions. People no longer saw each other as equal beings, but saw each other through the lens of dogma. The defense of faith transformed into the conquest of difference. The greed for accumulation, as I mentioned earlier, put on the cloak of the sacred. Humans used the holiest words to justify the most brutal actions. They said they fought for God, for the divine, for the Almighty, but in reality, they were only fighting for their own absolute power on earth. And so, every faith began with the light of salvation, but ultimately ended in a spreading flame, consuming the initial love. The division of humanity now is the deepest division, because it is built upon the very foundation that was supposed to connect them. After using faith to divide, humans turn to intellect. Knowledge is the most wonderful gift nature placed in human hands. It helps humans understand the universe, conquer disease, and build brilliant civilizations. Don't you see? Science built skyscrapers, closed the distance between continents. Knowledge helped humans live longer, more comfortably, and freed them from the slavery of manual labor. But at the same time as knowledge developed rapidly, the greed for accumulation, mentioned in Part 5, also learned how to evolve. Previously, Humans killed each other with stones and sticks. Then came bows, arrows, and swords. But when intellect reigned, war became much more intelligent and more impersonal. Science taught war how to kill people with the push of a button, without having to look into the enemy's eyes, without having to hear the screams. Humans could still destroy life from a great distance. This made the act of killing less stark, and consequently reduced the remorse. Knowledge is not the evil one. Knowledge is like a knife. It can be used to save people or to kill people. The problem is not with the knife, but with the hand that holds the knife, which is unchecked greed and the instinct to fear loss. Humans used intellect to create prosperity for a small group, and use that very prosperity as the just cause to refuse to share with the rest. The division between rich and poor, between owners and the have-nots, widened thanks to the most intelligent tools. The development of knowledge, therefore, did not abolish war, but only made war learn how to become more efficient and more complex. Humans always believe in the power of words and documents. When war temporarily ceased, they rushed to convene large meetings, signing solemn peace treaties. They called it the triumph of reason. Those papers contained the hope of millions, committing to no more conflict, committing to respect boundaries and sovereignty. But don't you see, disciple, peace signed on paper is a superficial peace. Even when the battlefield is clear of guns, blood still falls in silence. Blood falls in the slums where the poor are forgotten, not receiving the basic rights promised by that paper. Blood falls in the souls of returning soldiers, carrying terrifying memories and unable to reintegrate into normal life. And blood falls on the very page of those treaties, where terms are written by the compromise of power, not by compassion. Peace on paper is often just a temporary ceasefire, a time for the strong to rest and plan the next war. The greatest pain is not on the battlefield, but in the slow death in the soul. Those who did not die in battle still have to face fear, injustice, and emptiness in peaceful life. People think peace is the absence of gunfire, but I see peace must be the absence of hatred and fear in every heart. If greed remains, if discrimination persists, then no matter how many treaties are signed, peace will only be a short nap. Those papers do not have the power to heal spiritual wounds. They only have the power to conceal the truth that the world has never been truly still. Everyone wants an ideal world. No poverty, no jealousy, no war. They gather to speak of noble values, of equality, of brotherhood. That dream is pure and beautiful, but observe their actions closely. They crave justice, but dare not look at the chair they are sitting on in this world. They want to abolish injustice, but forget that the injustice of others created the convenience they enjoy every day. The wealth of one nation is often built upon the silent exploitation in another. The peace of one family is sometimes exchanged for the sweat and tears of a laborer not paid fairly. They want a world without distinction, but dare not give up the personal benefit that distinction brings. Giving up convenience, giving up superior status, is too difficult. The yearning for an ideal world, therefore, is often just a spiritual luxury that humans permit themselves to enjoy. They speak of grand changes, but shun the smallest change in their own lifestyle. Humans always set a subtle boundary. I want peace as long as I don't have to lose what I have. This very contradiction keeps the cycle of injustice turning. To achieve the ideal world, the disciple must be willing to pay the price with their own privilege. But people usually only want others to pay the price so they can be at peace. As long as humans dare not look at how they benefit from the pain of others, the ideal world will forever be a beautiful idea on a bookshelf. Look at the small lives born in conflict zones or in the forgotten lands of poverty and strife. The world welcomes them not with a gentle lullaby, but with gunfire. The first life they perceive is the trembling and the crying of fearful adults. They grow up and the first concepts they learn are not letters, but how to hide and distinguish the sound of explosions. Their world is measured by loss. They learn to count not with fingers, but with the number of ruined homes, the number of loved ones gone, or the number of days without food. For those children, war is not a historical event. It is the air they breathe every day. And as they grow, these children do not carry the memory of a peaceful world to long for. In their souls, chaos is normal. Hatred, even if unwanted, easily takes root because they have had to fight to live since the cradle. Adults often say the world is cruel, but I see the world as not cruel in the way people think. It simply has never been still since it was born. Collision is the law, not the accident. The earth has no intention of harming anyone. It is humans, with their survival instinct and unchecked greed, who created that cruelty and pass it on to the next generation. And those children, they are not victims. They are living witnesses to humanity's failure to find true peace. They are the proof that no matter how many treaties humans sign, chaos continues to be reborn in a new form. My disciple, continue your journey of observation with me. Now, I will invite you to look back at the very world that surrounds us and the truth of how it sustains life. Humans often complain about natural disasters. They call earthquakes anger and storms and floods punishment. But disciple, look with a purer mind. This earth, it never seeks absolute stillness. It is a living entity and life requires nonstop movement. Don't you see? An earthquake is not an accident. It is the way the Earth's tectonic plates rub against each other to release accumulated energy. Without that release, the entire planet would be compressed to the point of paralysis. Storms and floods are not mere destruction. They are how nature redistributes water and temperature, cleanses the air, brings nutrients from the mountains to the plains. They are necessary cleansing shakes for new life to sprout. Volcanic eruptions, while seemingly devastating, are how the earth renews itself, bringing new elements from deep within to enrich the surface soil. All those collisions are the way the earth breathes. It is the rhythm of creation through destruction. Nature constantly fights with itself to recreate its own form. This chaos is the living energy of the universe. If you pray for a planet that never has storms, never has earthquakes, you are praying for a dead planet, a cold rock with no life left. So, collision is not the exception. It is the rule for this world to continue existing. And humans, being a part of nature, are not outside that rule. Imagine a river, disciple. If that river were completely still, with no wind blowing, no rapids blocking the way, no collision making the water churn, what would happen? It would stop flowing. It would no longer carry oxygen and nutrients far away. Gradually, it would become a stagnant pool of water, devoid of life. Evolution is the same. It is driven by the need to overcome difficulty. It is the challenges, the threats, and the suffering that humans face that force them to think deeper, find new solutions, and rise from their current state. If humans achieve absolute peace, a state with no suffering, no need to struggle, then the evolution of the soul and intellect will stop. Everything would become dull and meaningless. Suffering, in my view, is not something to run from, but the harshest teacher. It is the fear of war that drives people to seek reconciliation. It is injustice that pushes them to build law. A world without suffering will also stop living in the way humans know, because life is the continuous transition between suffering and joy, between chaos and order. Lacking one of the two, movement will cease. The peace humans crave, absolute stillness, is impossible in this moving universe. The beauty of life is not in stillness, but in its courageous continuation amidst non-stop chaos. Throughout millions of years, nature has experimented with many forms of life, creating strong animals, creating clever animals. Then, with humans, nature did something special. It placed intellect within the human form, an intellect capable of self-awareness, of asking about its own existence, and of understanding the laws of the universe. And nature began a great experiment. It observed whether that intellect would be used to transcend instinct. Instinct, as I said, is the primal fear of loss and contention. Intellect is the ability to look beyond instinct, to see the connection between all things, and to choose the path of compassion instead of selfish self-protection. Nature placed both in human hands. On one side, the chaotic legacy from the beginning, on the other, the key to enlightenment, intellect. Then nature stood aside, patiently observing. Can humans use intellect to understand that? Fighting is to gain less, while letting go is to receive the entire universe? Can they see that peace is not conquest, but acceptance? To this day, you see, humans often fail in this experiment. They use intellect to strengthen instinct, to fight more efficiently, to accumulate more. But the experiment is not over. Nature still waits patiently to see if humans can use the gift of intellect to create a new kind of peace, internal peace, without needing to change the external chaos. Humans are the only species capable of creating things with words. They can use speech to describe nobility, to build hope, and to declare peace. They set up international forums where leaders sit together. They write declarations of human rights and equality. They wave white flags as the ultimate symbol of a ceasefire. All are beautiful acts of intellect. But look at the truth. That is peace created from words, a superficial, external thing. When humans are busy talking about peace, they often forget how to listen. They declare grand ideas, but have never been silent long enough to hear the real crying, the real gasping of each other. Peace in words is often a tool to conceal division in action. They speak the best words in the forum, but implement the cruelest policies when they return home. Peace is not a speech. It is a state of the soul. When humans focus too much on defining, debating, and declaring peace with words, they miss the opportunity to practice peace. Words have power, but words cannot replace genuine connection. As long as humans cannot listen to the suffering of others without judgment, the grandest declarations of peace will only be empty sounds, easily carried away by the wind. True peace does not need to be spoken. It needs to be felt and lived through the silence of compassion. Throughout recorded human history, you have seen how many great empires rose and fell, the Roman, Persian empires, or mighty dynasties. Humans often consider the fall of an empire to be the end of an era of oppression and the beginning of freedom. But look at this nonstop cycle. When an empire falls, what happens? A new empire is born again. Sometimes it has a different geographical shape. Sometimes it is an economic empire, or a technological empire, or even an ideological empire. No one wins this game, disciple. Only the shape of power changes. The nature of the struggle for power remains the same. It is the fear of loss, the craving for control, and the instinct to be superior to others. Whether it is a king wearing a golden crown or a transnational corporation, the underlying motivation is the same: chaos. The fall of one empire is only the reorganization of chaos, the cleanup to make space for a new collision. This is like the earth creating an earthquake to release energy, but then the energy accumulates again. Humans hope that the fall will bring peace, but it only brings a power vacuum that other strong entities immediately rush to fill. Peace is not the change of rulers. Peace is the disappearance of the need to rule. As long as humans believe they need to dominate others to be safe, The cycle of the rise and fall of empires will never stop. This is the stark truth of human history. It does not advance, it only spins around the axis of the survival instinct. My disciple, listen to the final words in my chain of observations. I will speak about how humans corrupted the most sacred concept, about the repetition of history, and conclude with a profound truth about life. Humans, with their business instinct, can turn everything into a commodity, including the highest spiritual values. Peace is no exception. At one point, peace is no longer a state of the soul or the result of compassionate practice. It becomes a product traded in the political and economic market. Don't you see? Peace is bought with the promises of politicians. They promise a bright future, promise stability and prosperity in exchange for votes or the support of the masses. Those promises often vanish as soon as they achieve their goals. Peace is sold with the hope of the weak. Organizations, activists sell their hope, call for donations and support in exchange for a vague commitment to ending conflict. They trade with the very tears and pain of others. And the saddest thing, disciple, is that peace is forgotten when it is no longer profitable. As long as it brings profit, helps consolidate power, and creates a beautiful image, it is mentioned. But as soon as it becomes a burden, hindering the accumulation of wealth or the expansion of influence, it is quietly pushed aside. When peace becomes a commodity, it is no longer the goal, but the means. It is used to conceal underlying war schemes. Temporary stability is sold at a very high price, but it is a false peace, built on the weak foundation of calculating benefit and harm. This is the irony. Humans crave genuine peace, but are willing to accept an inferior and temporary version, simply because it fits their immediate interests. As long as peace is something to be traded, chaos will never end. You have journeyed with me through this entire course, from the growling of volcanoes to the treaties signed with ink, and now, I invite you to look at the big picture that I have observed through thousands of human reincarnations. In this vision of mine, I see one simple and painful truth. Humans are still running around the same circle. Every generation is proud that they have progressed beyond their ancestors, that they are smarter, have more modern technology. But they are still asking the old questions. Who is friend? Who is enemy? What is mine? How do I stay safe? They have changed weapons from swords to missiles, changed land borders to economic and digital borders, changed old faiths to new ideologies. But the essence of the collision has not changed. Humans are still driven by the primal call of survival and boundless greed. They still shed blood because of the fear of loss and the craving for control. They still fight to find a place where there is no more fighting. This is the eternal repetition. They build higher walls only to have to find more sophisticated tools to tear them down. They create grand theories of peace, but return to using those very theories as an excuse to discriminate and attack those who do not believe. I see the tiredness in the human soul, the weariness of having to constantly hope for an external change without finding internal stillness. They are running away from their own instinct, and that very running brings them back to the starting point. Peace can only be found when humans stop and accept this truth, instead of trying to break the loop with yet another fight. My child, you asked me from the very beginning, does a world of complete peace truly exist? Now, disciple, you have the answer from the very observation of the universe and human history. I speak softly, like the final breath of a falling petal. This world, by its nature, will never be truly peaceful. If absolute peace is the final goal, then that goal goes against the very law of life. Chaos is the rule. Collision is how energy is exchanged. Division, opposition, and imperfection are the materials that create diversity and movement. But do not grieve over this truth, disciple. I want you to see the beauty in that very truth. It is precisely because the world will never be truly still that life continues to persist. It is because humans still suffer that they still crave to seek compassion. It is because there is war that we cherish every small moment of tranquility. Absolute peace is humanity's most beautiful dream, but it is also the very thing that nature will never allow to happen, because only with collision does life continue to move, continue to seek to rise, continue to know how to create. The beauty of the earth is not in its stillness, but in the fact that it continues to move, continues to live courageously, even though it never has a truly quiet day. So, disciple, instead of fighting to create a world without war, learn to find serenity within that very chaos. That is the only path that leads to true liberation.